Go ahead and turn in your yesterday's packet to this empty chair. And if you're hunting for a no-name page paper, that's all right there as well. To have Washington on your side. Hi-oh! It's Tuesday. Feels like Monday. Go ahead and turn in yesterday's work to this empty chair. If you're looking for a no-name page, it's all right there. There's a pin strike it.
That would be.
Another quick opener for you after you've turned in. Yesterday's work. Oh, actually, peel off the article. Just turn in the questions. Peel off the article. Just turn in the questions.
The first page had. Yeah, the first page has questions.
And we did those questions. He told you to get a good
I said I'll get those first. Page
Well, I
75. You may have recognized those as last week's question. It was just a product of how it scans. How it scans. Hey, which one of you gets credit for that work last night? Which one of you gets credit for that work last night? I sent you an email as soon as you sent me an email.
Where's that?
I saw the one where you said what I didn't turn in.
When you both sent me your bonus points last night,
Oh,
I responded right away.
you was up that late.
You did it.
I don't know where mine is.
He didn't.
Now you can turn in your yesterday's work. Go ahead and peel off the articles. Only turn in the questions. You didn't get one of the Alright, yesterday's distance learning right here. Peel off the articles, just turn in the questions, make sure your name's on it. Make sure your name's on it. If you didn't get a packet, I still don't know why, but that's okay. I'll give you an extra time.
Hey, I can tell you why. I'll tell you why.
Page 75 is not questions you had to do. Page 75 was kind of a misscan.
This had nothing to do with it. Yeah, it was
Well, you may have recognized it as last week's question.
Yeah, I did.
I need page 83 and 84. Page 83 and 84.
That's all.
Yeah, it's written there.
Make sure your name's on it as you're peeling the articles off. Make sure your name's on it.
Just feeling like
We definitely struggle with that. You don't know why. Where did you get that Got some of you on the way in the door. Give a quick warm up. Oh.
Y'all know that video he played?
I'll end. All right, as you turned in, hopefully you recognize this question. Since we talked about it yesterday, I want you to come up with 4 members of your cabinet. 4 advisors you're going to put in your cabinet, just like George Washington had 4 in his OG cabinet. That made it happen. She said, I didn't have a packet, but that's okay. Hey, you got all 50 copies for you?
I would imagine that.
Y'all don't let her forget about that. Just graduation time, don't let her forget about that. Lower again. Do your pencils, get situated. Get situated. You just need page 83. You just need page 83. All right, I invite the chaos sometimes. I know that we were moving around, turning stuff in, but the bell is rung, so go ahead and give me your attention. If you need to turn in the distance work, it's this chair right here. I just need, it's one page front back, page 83, 84. Now you peel off the articles, you keep the articles. Keep them in your binder. I'm going to give you a page divider that says Coach Book Chapters. Because this book that we've been using is called the Coach Book. Now, it's really good for distance days, but I don't like distance days. So I don't know how many more times I'm going to use this Coach Book. But in the event that I do, I mean, the articles are pretty good. They are at the simple level. It's not like you're reading some, highbrow textbook that's hard to digest. I mean, it's a pretty simple read. I would hope that this class agrees with that. So I'm going to give you another page divider that says Coach Book Chapters. I haven't done it yet, but just like notes and vocab, you can keep your binder organized with these Coach Book chapters I give you. Not trying to photocopy the whole book. Publisher probably wouldn't appreciate that. But when I do give you 1, 2, 3, 4, page articles at a time, you can at least keep those. They're good articles. I'm not wasting your read time. I'm honing us in on key information. And it's really digestible. It's not some mega article. Kind of gets right to the facts. So you have turned in 2 pages of questions here. I will applaud Jacqueline. She said Anna Kate took my packet, but I still made it happen. In any event that you didn't get a packet, you couldn't make it happen, I'm going to give you grace of 1 day. If anybody still needs a packet, here they are. I understand I wasn't in the room to control the flow of information. It's cool. So here is the packet, and that'll just simply be due tomorrow, like a 1 day grace period. If you're playing games with me, whatever. Sometimes I get games, we still do tomorrow. Those of you that have not taken the exam, I think it's 2 of you. Marley and Abby, am I missing anyone?
I took it.
Christian. Marley, Abby, and Christian. So we're not taking it in class, right? If you lose in a class today would be the worst scenario. What I've said is before school, after school, or second block. Now, if your second block teacher is not going to approve of that, then that's fine. Second block is my planning period. But before school, after school, second block, you got to get with me. Tell me what you want. And you gotta give me enough lead time, 24 hours in advance. I got kids and sports schedules and stuff as well. So I'll be here for you before school, after school, second block. And you need to take that test by Friday. Okay? I'm moving on to Unit 2. I can't keep hanging out in Unit 1. So y'all get with me. Let me know what you want to do. And I think it'll take about 45 minutes, not 90 minutes or something like that. So for the 3s of you, that's what I need you to do. I said yesterday on the Google Meets we might go over some questions in class. I'm just going to wait until these 3 get that taken, and then I'll coach you a little bit more on questions. That's something that we are going to talk a lot more about, is how to approach these lengthier constructed type questions. All that to say, similar to yesterday's warm-up, but not everybody was on the call. Go ahead. This is your warm-up right now. While I get situated, this is your warm-up. We talked about, briefly, you wrote it in the chat box. Now I'm asking you to develop it a little bit more. George Washington had 4 people in his first cabinet. Who would you put in your first cabinet? What I really want you to do is lock into your brain the idea that advisors are important. Advisors help people lead. No one person has it all figured out. Just like George Washington said, I need help running the government. And hey, let's be honest, he's a pretty good leader by himself. You all can also benefit from advisors in your life. So a little bit of an academic and personal life reflection right here.
I'm so confused about the title. Like, are we supposed to be putting like their job?
Yeah, so the name is simply like the person.
I felt that like it was like mom. Your mom? Or
Yeah.
sister.
Well, okay, she is your mom, but the
she-
title you give, you might say,
I
tax
said business.
businesswoman, yeah, tax
That's
expert.
nice.
Your dad's the insurance man, right? So the title is that. The example I gave was a hitting
My mom
coach.
doesn't help me.
My dad is my hitting coach. It's not true, but it's the example I came up with. I'll give you a minute to do this. Give you a minute to do this. Yeah.
I'm starting out doing work.
Oh, that was like this.
I'm gonna try.
I hope you are realizing that we are all better together than we are as individuals. I am handing out this week's stuff for you.
I had it turned off, but we could still hear.
I don't know.
I have that turned off. Yeah, I turned it off on
Yeah, George Washington had George. I think this should come up before as well. Yesterday was kind of on the flip side of the meets. Today I'm just asking you to think it through a little bit more. It's good for the academics and it's good for your
Swanson, I only trust one person.
If you have trust issues, maybe you're having issues coming up with a list of 4. It's funny that Washington didn't have his best friends in his council. He actually had some of his rivals, even people that he disagreed with politically and philosophically. But because of having alternate voices in the room, he got a well-rounded perspective on how to run the government. Yes. If you don't have 4, that might be a personal reflection thing. Who else can you trust in your life?
People you trust are more likely to point out where you're wrong.
I had a great response in 4th block. The person said, he said, you know what, this is because she had issues.
As for your title,
He'd be saying he's gonna be home before me, but I will be home before you.
All right, just about one more minute. I kind of hear the conversations. Some of you like totally got your 4 figured out. And some of you are questioning if you have any real friends in life. This will be a journal. If you're done, give me a holler. I need help passing. I'm not done. Let's extend this by a minute or so because I need to get this stuff handed back. Alright, my bad. I forgot I had this whole stack to hand back. I should have been doing it while you were warming up. Get this handed back and then we'll talk about everything else.
She's a nurse. I trust her because she's a nurse. She's a Dr. Mayer.
That is so exciting, guys.
Landon, who do you trust?
Not you. I'm just playing.
No, you ain't. He means
I'm just being funny. I didn't trust
That's a great idea.
you. You were missing these guys.
Is that on other paper? I wrote you a note, I wasn't there that day.
Yeah, I'll wait there and get that.
That's yours. So, did I get your?
I don't even care.
I
was about to say, I didn't
Hey,
I know, don't have the other notes. I'll go to the dinner.
Hey, he's gonna take a bunch of stuff. Give her that.
Hey,
There
the one
you
with
go.
the curly hair.
He's the one that sat there.
Oh my gosh, Harrison, you want really?
Wait, I'm confused, so you ain't gonna give me your notes, right? You're so stupid.
I'm a kid. I know.
Yeah, tell me what you better right there.
That really misses.
Are you for real? It's got one. They said, okay, I got mine.
I'm not putting anybody in this room.
Because I wasn't here and I said, I need this.
What's the meaning of that?
I need it.
So it was, that was 99 on just causes up.
Very
We're missing the event, that's when we get the color. It's not a snowflake. You're missing the sauce.
Why'd you be having the tea?
And then I gotta do it for I'll get you a gift. I'll get you a gift.
Can't read it, okay.
No, this
I got a
Jennifer Brown. Of course it made
No,
you wanna go with six?
All right, back to me. As I got two guys handing stuff out. Back to me. Here's what I hear in the room right now. A couple of you, I was absent. I need this paper. When we go to the bathrooms, I have paper. Back to me right here. Except for the two that are handing things out. I appreciate it. We've had noise up, noise down, noise up, noise down. If you need a particular set of notes, a particular set of vocab, I have the whole stack of extras. I keep them right there. You gotta come and get them. Like when I posted on Google Classroom, and I've been told that so-and-so is out for 5 days and they will work on Google Classroom, I'm done with it, right? I assume you're gonna be printing, you're gonna be on top of it, you're watching the videos, you're reading the PowerPoints. When your parents or yourself say, I will work on Google Classroom, and that's what Ms. Vicky tells me, and daggone, I think you're working on Google Classroom. So now you're coming to me and like, I need this set of papers, whatever. I'll give it to you, of course I'll give it to you. But we're gonna do it today, we're gonna do it at our bathroom break time. So any of you who are just saying, I didn't have this page, I need it, I'll give it to you at the bathroom break time. If you feel like, oh man, Swanson just counted off 50 points, whatever, get it to me. If you are absent, I totally understand, that's an absence. If you're late on it as it is, that'll be a grade deduction because of time limits. But here's my thought on the grade book. If I put a 0 in it and I got your attention, then good. Right? At least I got your attention. I got your parents' attention, then better. So now you are probably motivated to do something about it. And that is what I was going for in the first place. So as Austin finishes these last little bits here, you guys. All right, now as all these things were handed back to you, notes go behind notes. Vocab goes behind vocab. Study guides and scavenger hunt goes behind study guides. So get this in your binder where it needs to be. Be organized, and you will be situated for review, for games, for the binder grade, for the EOC, all that stuff. The stuff I just handed to you, put it where it goes. Yep, the stuff I just handed to you, put it where it goes, in your binder. Do you have Marley, do you have a binder dividers? Marley, do you have a page that says notes?
Okay, yeah, if we ever have a situation like that where notes and stuff are done, like, do you want us to see, a picture of it? Or like, like a picture of ourselves, because you know there's real credit, if we ever get out like that, we need to have everything come out and like send.
It's a good question. That would be fine. I'm not gonna make that policy. Personally, perhaps on Friday, that'd be great. All right, so it is time. I know, like, click, file. Let's go ahead and get that finished. Somebody tell me someone who's in your cabinet. Who's in your cabinet?
Wally.
Sanaa, who you got? Bro, so there's like a cabinet right there. Are you having a cabinet meeting right now? Okay. What title do each of these ladies hold in your cabinet?
Is GC your cat?
Boy, that'd
I
be
should
so
have put
funny.
That's a full power flow right there.
I should have put GC in mine. I just put Savannah as like an allergy person.
Okay.
She has a lot of.
She's the utility planner, so that's just an all-around expert. What about Briley?
She does music.
Okay. And I think they could both be dancing instructors, right? If you wanted to raise a dance.
I bet you said it.
So Sanaa knows she's got two reliable individuals. Who else? Who else can share with me? Hey, the volume. It's my turn now. It's my turn. Jacqueline, who you got?
I put Haley.
Haley. Why? What is her title to you?
I said a spring bitch.
Because, okay.
She helps me make good decisions.
Okay, moral compass. Maybe her title is moral compass. Okay. If I was wanting to build a tennis team, I would put Landon Spencer in it because I saw him coaching his peers at the rec tennis courts this weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Who else? Give me one more.
I don't know.
I put Tanya in mine.
My father.
Mrs. Bordeaux.
Yes.
Okay. What is her title?
Cheer coach.
Cheer coach. Because she gonna get you a ring.
Yes.
All right, baby queen. There you go. Harrison, who you got?
My father.
No.
Huh?
My father.
Your father. What's his title?
Football coach.
Football coach. And why?
He coached me throughout the day.
Okay, so he has more experience than you. So we're kind of belabor the point here on the cabinet. One of George Washington's precedents was establishing the cabinet. I hope you see that even a world-class leader like George Washington himself decided he needed help running the government. So surely you, at age 15 or 16, don't have it all figured out and would do well to rely on the advice of people who have experience more than you have wisdom that you don't have. So again, it's a school activity because I need you to know about George Washington, but it's also kind of a life activity, a little bit of personal reflection too. Who do you trust? Here's some miscellaneous thoughts. Okay, just hear me out on my miscellaneous thoughts. I am cool with our alternate seating. I know Sanaa can't even handle sitting. I'm cool with like, hey, what did he just say? Can you help me with that? But if we're having full conversation, you're gonna get under my skin just a little bit. Let's be the class that I know we are. Okay, here's miscellaneous thoughts. I just handed papers back to you. File them where they go. Feedback from you. I want you to know I listened. Here's some of the feedback I got yesterday based off of your exam reflection page. Thank you for those of you that really put some writing. You all did the highlighting and you had some personal reflection, but those of you that did writing and gave me real feedback, thank you. Here's kind of the themes I got. This is not every single comment, but like the overall themes that I got. First, you guys would appreciate more open-ended notes, less fill in the blank. I hear you on that. Some of you said I really liked the sketches, the drawing. That kind of made it a little bit more interactive for me. One comment I got, I really appreciated this because this is the perspective I need. One comment I got said, sometimes I'm just looking for that word and I'm really missing what you're sharing, what you're teaching, and looking for that word just kind of gets me off track. I hear you. I'm trying something different this week in particular, and this unit kind of lends itself to it. I've gone away from, this is already in your hands, I've gone away from those look for the fill in the blank notes, and I've got this open-ended here for you, okay? Vocab on the back. I got some guiding questions on a couple of them. Basically follows the 5 W's, it always does. But, well, so I'm gonna call this vocab. Okay, these 2 pages. Yeah, these 2 pages are vocab. I even found a color printer, which is pretty cool because I haven't always been able to print in color here at the high school. And we're going to walk through 4 of the first 5 presidents this week. And we'll get to the 5th one next week, but we're going to walk through 4 of the first 5. And then, of course, some key vocab that fits into that. And since you asked, it's up to you to take thorough notes. No longer do you have to write the magic word. No longer do you have to, go back, I missed it. It's up to you to write whether it's on the screen, or whether it comes out of my mouth. If you want to listen and then go back and kind of write your thoughts afterwards, note-taking is on you. It's more of a college way to do it. I know some of you are in college classes, so you ought to be able to handle this honors class at that. So you asked, I answered. Our writing is a little bit different this week. Some of you said mid-unit checks. I kind of combined that with test-style review questions. I hear you on the mid-unit check. I know we went a long time without really having an exam. Now, I probably not, the benchmark exams are what they are. I'm not going to be creating more test grade. We're locked in at our 5 benchmark test grades. But I do think that we could have a mid-unit check. That would put your brains in the place of how to analyze multiple choice questions. I thought spoons was fun. We had a great time with that. But I hear you. That is kind of the surface level knowledge. Some of you were caught a little off guard by the depth of the Illuminate question. So I got you on what you're asking for. I hear you. But hear me on this. I will not pre-give you those test questions. I'm not teaching you what to think. If I wanted you to memorize a key statement, man, I'd drill that key statement. I'm teaching you how to think. And it's a real fine line. You know, there's a phrase out there called teaching to the test. Some classrooms might bring you right to that multiple choice. They might be like, hey, by the way, when we talk about the Louisiana Purchase, it's going to be C. Go ahead, Louisiana Purchase is going to be C. I'm not going to do that in here. I want you to understand the bigger package, the bigger story of the Louisiana Purchase, just for example. Because, guys, life is the test is life. Is it going to be on the test? Yes. The test is life. The test is when you go to church and you're having an intelligent conversation. The test is when you go to the sports and you're debating socioeconomic politics with the person next to you. The test is when you're going to go to parties in college and you're going to want to be intelligent about what you're talking about, not just run. You don't want someone to just run over you because they seem to think they have the answers. Life is the test. Life is the test. The test is more important than celebrity marriages or gossip. The test is more important than sports trivia. Life is the test. So I'm not leading you to just some key question. Everything will be on the test. So feels a whole lot like I need to remind you how we started world history. Feels like some of us are evolving back into just give me the answers, to which I will say, no, of course not. I'm neither going to spoon feed you nor just give you the answers. So I hear you on what you're saying. Mid-unit check, kind of help us with the style of questions. I know some of y'all, maybe mixed opinions, but some of y'all didn't like writing your own questions. You didn't think that was the best for you. Oh, I hear that. I'm trying to keep y'all engaged. I'm trying to do things that you'll find both fun and rewarding, productive in terms of your studying. And at the same time, I'm not going to give you this. I'm just not going to give you the answers. I'm not teaching you what to think. I'm teaching you how to think. You will get better at some follow-on units, okay? Unit 1 was like, whoa, okay, that's what an Illuminate test looks like. You'll get better at follow-on. So I hear you on all of that. I've taken that into consideration. One more here. A couple of you said things along the lines of, and maybe this fits with the fill-in-blank notes, but, more interaction, less PowerPoints. I hear that. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You got to recognize the changes in pace. If we have an activating question, bit of a journal question, if I mix you up in the room, say chat with a partner, that's a change in pace. We do something like the cheese puffs, or we have the best breakup letter ever, that's a change in pace. We still have to drill vocab. I have to lecture you. I like to call it conversation, right? We go back and forth. Still have to have that. But I hear you, and I have changed the fill-in-the-blank notes for that very reason. But trust me, my voice gets tired of talking as well. So the changes in pace, we got to recognize when they come. Not every day is some world-class, dynamic, entertaining activity. Sometimes we got to just lay the foundation so we can understand that activity in the first place. Trust me, I got more coming up. It's not all, world history is like, wow, let's be a different costume every day. We got some visitors that are going to come to our class, but we've also got some activities that are going to get us out of the classroom. We've got some stuff that are going to catch you off guard. So just believe me when I say the changes of pace are coming. And at the same time, I still have to have a foundation of the lecture and the conversations that we have. So all of that said, anything for the good of the group? You want to chime in? Gripes, complaints? I hear you. Still wondering to get a packet? Still trying to get a packet from Anna Kate? Someone over there? All right. All that said, let's go ahead and dive into today's conversation. We are going to go over the presidencies of Washington and Adams. Some of the Washington part will be a little bit abbreviated because it was yesterday, but I'm going to package these two guys together, and we're going to be smarter at the end of our conversation here. Time dependent, I might have a hands-on activity for you, which kind of gets after what you guys are asking for, or if our conversation just flows the way it flows, we'll just see. We'll see how much time we have left. How would I approach the notes that are in front of you? Well, George Washington gets his own page, and you see I break it down. Challenges, precedents, his final statement, farewell address. So pay attention to George Washington. Of course, we're also going to talk about John Adams. He's on that back page. And then we're going to get into a couple of those bigger chunks of vocab as well. So it's all encompassing. It's not just go in order and listen for the word anymore. Sir. Nope, just bugging your brother. Cool. All right, well, let's put ourselves in America in the 1790s. It's a very agricultural world, right? We have just come through the war. We've come through the Constitutional Convention. We have some cities, but very few overall. By and large, we're an agrarian society. Think back to our early colonies. We're talking cash crops and the farmers that grow them and sell them. There's Boston, there's New York City, there's Philadelphia, but a majority of Americans were farmers. There's about 3 million Americans in 1790. Anybody take a guess as to how many people are in America today?
7 billion.
Nah, that's the world.
That's
7 billion, about 9 billion in the whole world.
No, that's 8 billion.
Less than a billion.
64 million.
Less than a
More than that.
Russia.
640
69
billion.
million.
330 million. About 330 million Americans today.
That's
Okay, that's what you're a part of. In 1790, there were 3 million. So we've had exponential growth in the 250 years since. Who are these Americans? About 20% of them are African Americans, and very small percentage of them are free non-whites, you could say, African Americans, but also a variety of other ethnicities in there as well. So dominantly white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant colonists, former colonists, very few minority African Americans. Of course, the slave trade perpetuates how many African Americans are coming into the country as well. And we have ourselves on the edge of a new government. Unfortunately, the week I wasn't here for last week, I do think the presentation was kind of self-explanatory by itself, but we didn't really interact about the new government. So just suffice it to say, we've come through the Constitutional Convention. We argued about representation. Large states had one perspective. What was that called? What plan? Large states favored what plan? The Virginia plan. Whew, okay. Small states favored the New Jersey plan because it is a small state. We're arguing about how to represent ourselves. Suffice it to say, this is not my point I'm making right now. Suffice it to say, we have a new constitution. It goes into effect March 4th, 1789. So our government has been active. Our present form of government has been active ever since March 4th, 1789. In our new constitution, we have a way to vote for president, and that is through the Electoral College. Now, what's different is that we do not vote for a president, vice president ticket. Today, your parents vote for 2 people. It's called the ticket. Trump, Pence, Biden, Harris, they vote for them together. At the time, here's how the president and vice president were elected. Top vote getter, president. Second vote getter, vice president. So you can see how maybe different parties would be represented, president, vice president, and it's not exactly the battle buddy relationship that we know for the ticket today. Well, in our first election, Washington wins. Of course, we know this. It's not unanimous. He gets 69 electoral college votes. John Adams gets 34 electoral college votes. So it's a majority, but there were some voters out there who would have maybe preferred John Adams to be the first president. And then in the midst of all this as well, we have the Bill of Rights being adopted and ratified along the same time frame. So boom, we have a new government. We have a first president. It is George Washington. And that is probably the most memorized fact that you all could ever hope to know, right? George Washington on a dollar bill, George Washington on a quarter. My 5-year-old knows George Washington was the first president of the United States. Bada bing, bada boom, we have ourselves a first president. Our country was so prosperous at this time, I say this somewhat sarcastically, George Washington, the brand new first president of the United States, had to take out a small personal loan, cash, in order to move to the national headquarters, which was actually not the White House in Washington, D.C. It was in New York City. Just a little extra factoid, kind of a picture I like to throw in every now and then. Washington had to take out a loan to move from Virginia to New York to be the president. These days, of course, there's instantly Secret Service and protection, and the president never pays to travel. He actually gets a pretty healthy salary, all that kind of stuff. Washington, in the time that his country needed service, he paid his own way to get to the inauguration. He paid his own way to even move to the national capital, which at the time was New York. He was moving to Washington, D.C. for the next president. So I think that shows his commitment. I think that shows how much he was ready to be president, even giving his personal fortune, money, in order to become the president, in order to get to Washington, D.C. Here we have it. This is the review from yesterday. First president elected twice. Presidency faced several challenges, established several precedents. This was yesterday. I'm not going to hang out on this slide for very long. Here's some challenges, and this is where your notes break it down pretty well. Box for challenges. Challenge number one was a big national debt. Thus, we formed the national bank. I'm going to have us, each of these is going to be its own chunk here in just a second. We got a problem with the British. You might say, didn't we beat them? Don't we have a treaty? Yes, but the British still refused to move out of certain western frontier locations. The British were still abusing our small and unpowerful navy. So we have ourselves a British problem. This leads to Jay's Treaty. Have a chunk on that in just a second. And generally speaking, the need to raise money through taxes. And not everybody agreed on how that happened. So thus, we have a tax on whiskey. And thus, double thus, we have the Whiskey Rebellion. So taxation becomes a big deal. My gosh, didn't we just fight a revolution to get away from taxes? That's what a lot of people thought. So go ahead and have this down on your challenges category. And I'm going to be breaking it down even a little bit further on each of these here in just a second. Who would tax whiskey, right? People love whiskey. All right, moving on to not a president. Okay. Can I really not write that fast? 3 big challenges. Okay, that's what I'm getting to. There's 3 big challenges, and the parenthetical there, the parentheses on each of them, is the response to those challenges. And I'm gonna, over the next several minutes, I'm gonna teach you about each of those. This is the type of American history where you probably haven't been in. What's that? In a second.
Okay.
Yeah, good answer. Good question. This is the type of American history you probably haven't been introduced to before. American Revolution, yeah, it happened. I've seen a movie about it. This is the next step of actually establishing the government. It's a little less intuitive. Unless you've been a real big reader in your young years, you probably haven't heard about a lot of this. So whereas you might have had some familiarity with the war, you probably really need to tuck in now because this is stuff that isn't quite as obvious or you haven't caught it in your past learning before. Since Chandler asked, little pause point, we will go to the bathroom at this time. If you need papers of any sort, stay back here so I can give them to you. Go ahead and go to the left, take the shortcut.
Thank you.
Who needs what? Coloring one?
Yeah, go on. I need to, what is it? Okay. It's my favorite ends.
The coloring one? On the circle? Use that one?
He watches those videos.
Whoever said about these guns, complained about these guns, you're getting kicked out. You're done. You're done.
Actually,
You're done.
You're done.
Did you? It was you.
What?
It was
Did I do what?
I played it.
whoever came up.
It was here.
It was not right.
It was yours?
It was not my idea.
Use the circle with the other one. Hey, Blake, here's one more. Gary, come on. Circle.
Let's go.
I need to,
You need to get your tail up and kill.
I was coming. God dang. I gotta find it first. The event of,
Just say the event.
I need the events of. I need the events of.
It's one circles. Okay. Landon, what do you need? Madison, what do you need? Savannah, you situated?
Yeah, I just had to, whole bunch of stuff.
I got some no names right here as well.
Will the packet from last week go with,
So, yeah, that's what I'm gonna give you another page provider, just like this that says Coach Book Chapter.
They're not getting back?
This unfortunately just gave.
No,
You
the,
didn't call me. Oh, it was.
last joke.
Yeah, ha. Do you have a name up here? Do you have a zero in the grade book? I don't have everyone's grade book.
First off.
I was Dennis. Yeah.
I got a couple up here.
No? Alright.
You didn't get this back?
I heard that camera didn't pop up. I hope.
It's just got a little,
What?
Landon got things about home.
Oh.
Why did he put my last name as Spencer? Like, he had everybody's first name and then mine's just Spencer.
I'm scared to do
Sorry.
Wait, I'm. I guess we'll have to actually read the thing.
Where's the boy hairs?
Did you complain about
It will change. I know it.
All right, come on in, find a seat, take a seat. Thumbs up.
You what?
I wasn't here.
Boy, the notes that we had was fine. No, it's not. We just need to learn to fill in the blanks.
Actually, I think I saw it. Go on.
Now we're writing more work. No problem making words. Be stressing out these stupid notes. Come on, Chrissy.
Really?
Hey, check your phone.
It don't matter what. I'm gonna put that one in there.
Hey, I got it again, babe. Look at it.
All right, friends, Roman country, here we go. Taking that bathroom break. You jotted down some things about challenges, and here we go. So Alexander Hamilton, the namesake of what? The namesake of what?
Hamilton.
Yeah, Hamilton, the hit Broadway musical. This is that Alexander Hamilton. Yeah, so Chandler points out that this Alexander Hamilton gets his own box. He is not a president, but he is significant enough in our conversation this week that he gets his own box. Again, you see how big the box is. I'm not looking for an essay. I'm not looking for 1,000 words. Just kind of some information about Alexander Hamilton that goes in the box. The whole past weekend, I did that bonus points challenge about Alexander Hamilton. About 4 of you watched the show and learned a little bit more about Alexander Hamilton. I think he threw away his shot, not his shot with Aaron Burr, but his shot to be president. I think he made some life decisions that kind of took him away from being potentially being a president. So as significant as Alexander Hamilton is, he is not one of our presidents, but he is very significant to the early Americas because he was Washington's Secretary of Treasury. That is why he's on the $10 bill today. You pull out a $10 bill, you're looking at Alexander Hamilton. Yep, that's right. And that's because he's the first Secretary of the Treasury. He was a believer in a national bank. Now, we don't have a national bank today, so that's maybe a little hard to understand. We have the Bank of America. That's actually just a brand name. That's not the bank. You know, we have Pineland Bank, we have First National Bank. Those are all privately owned banks. We don't have a national bank. But in our early government, Alexander Hamilton thought, hey, the debt that this country has from the war should be shared by all. All states contributed, but we want to absolve the states of debts in order to take on a national debt. To have a national debt, we will have a national bank to then pay it. His logic was everybody benefited from the war, right? 13 colonies, 13 stars on the flag. Everybody benefited from the war. Everybody is now independent. Just because some states had different level of financial commitments, we need to even that out. And that is his idea of taking on the debt at the national level. Southern states and northern states had a disagreement in this. This is the beginning of southern and northern states having disagreements. Northern states, they tended to have larger debts. In southern states, they tended to have already paid off their debts, right? Whatever debt they had from the war, their crops, their cash crops, and their economy was kind of already able to take care of those debts. So the southern states were like, hey, what do you mean nationally take on a debt? We've already paid our debts. Whereas the northern states, New York, Pennsylvania, they're like, yeah, take on our debts, please, because that'll help our state governments be absolved of debts. So we have some disagreement in here, and that is just the beginning of the north-south split. We, of course, are going to see that really manifest into the American Civil War about 100 years later, 80 years later. There is some good ideas behind this national debt. There's some reasons to have the national debts. And that is to say that if we have a debt and we're taking on loans from other countries, well, guess what? If you loan out money to a buddy, Gage, you loan some money to Blake. Do you want Blake to disappear on you, or do you want Blake to stay around and pay you back?
That's going to be a little bit more.
Depending on how much money it is. All right, significant amount. Significant amount. Do you want Blake to do well enough to be able to pay you back, or do you want him to like ghost you, disappear, not be around anymore? Yeah. Oh, okay. Gage is trying to mess up my story here. Here's my point. When we took on loans from other countries, it was beneficial because those countries then wanted us to succeed. Would those countries want us to fail? They loan us a lot of money. Will they want us to fail? No, they want us to succeed so that they get their money back. So that was a positive of taking on the state's debts and having a national bank, because other countries are now invested in this American experiment. Also, having a national bank, having something at the federal level, kind of contributed to overall sense of nationalism. We're all in this together. We are one country. It's not Virginia and Georgia and Pennsylvania and Delaware. Nope, we have a national bank and we are all in this together. So it's kind of the upfront about Hamilton and the national bank. However, it was seen as kind of elitist. It was seen as benefiting those that came from old money, not the majority of Americans who were more agrarian, more farm-based. A little bit more here, Hamilton, and this is the original National Bank building. A national bank would print a national currency. Instead of all these state currencies, we could now have a national currency. And a real difficulty here, and I'm not trying to make you a constitutional law scholar, but a difficulty here is that the Constitution did not say we could have a national bank. The Constitution did not say we couldn't have a national bank. So some people, strict interpreters of the Constitution, would say if it's not in the Constitution, you can't do it. But more flexible, the more broad view is that you can do whatever is necessary for the government to function. That's called the necessary and proper clause. It's in the Constitution. It's a debate we still have today. Some people will say only what's written in the Constitution is what you can do in government. Others will say, the founding fathers, they didn't know what to expect decades or centuries into the future. That's why they have the necessary and proper clause, saying that you can do anything that isn't specifically isn't specifically mentioned in the Constitution. You can still do it if it's necessary and proper. So this is Hamilton. He is definitely for the national bank. If you watch the musical Hamilton, a lot of there's 2 rap battles. Am I right, Sanaa? You're the Hamilton expert. 2 rap battles. These rap battles are between members of the cabinet arguing for or against the national bank, for or against federal control of debt. So that may not sound like that interesting of a topic, but that's why the musical is so landmark or so interesting, because it does make it something that you want to get into. It shows the drama of that early republic, the debates for or against, strict interpretation, loose interpretation of the Constitution. And it showed, back to the musical is what I'm talking about. It shows that these guys were human. It shows that they had debates with each other. They did not fully agree. Even though they were inside Washington's cabinet, you might say they were his advisors, they were on the same team, they still had different opinions. One man who has a different opinion is Thomas Jefferson. He is one of 4 in the cabinet. Hamilton, Treasury, Jefferson, Secretary of State. So, Washington's only got 4 advisors. 2 of them adamantly disagree with each other over the national bank. Jefferson says it's not in the Constitution, so we can't have it. He was a strict interpreter of the Constitution.
What was his role?
He's a Secretary of State. So on your notes here, Thomas Jefferson is going to be a president as well, and the notes are a little bit more focused on his role as president. Would be, it's up to you to jot down. And this is where I say maybe you just want to listen and catch, and jot your notes a little bit later. Or some of you like to write down every word. But the block that I have for Thomas Jefferson, I want that to be for his presidency, which he's going to be the 3rd president. We're going to get to him. We're getting to him, I promise. So what I'm saying, I wouldn't write this down under Thomas Jefferson's block necessarily because it's not related to his presidency. This is pre-President Jefferson. Jefferson says that it's not in the Constitution, so we can't have one. And by the way, we don't even need one. We don't need to take on states' debts. We have a drastic difference in opinion here. In the end, Northerners vote for the bank. Southerners vote against the bank. Just another way that the North and South starts to distinguish itself. We're going to call that sectionalism here in just a couple of decades. Sectioned in the North, sectioned in the South. We'll have a whole lot more about sectionalism as we talk about the Civil War. These differences highlighted the loose versus strict interpretation of the Constitution. And as unified as we once seemed, right? Let's all rally under the same banner, fight the British, fight for independence. We now see some cracks in that unity, and we start to see that we don't all have the same opinion. Even though we're now an independent country, we don't all have the same opinion, and obviously we see that manifested in politics still today. We're definitely starkly divided on a whole lot of things. Here's the verdict on the national bank. In the end, Washington agrees with Hamilton. He agrees that we should have a national bank. We should print a federal currency. He agrees that he is a loose interpreter of the Constitution. Just because it wasn't written in the Constitution doesn't mean we can't do it, as long as it is necessary and proper for running the government. Washington was not a member of a party, but a lot of his decisions would show that he favored the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. So he's not a so-called Federalist. He does not become a member of a party, but his decisions definitely show that he is in line with most Federalist ideas. So the verdict on the national bank is that we get one. Andrew Hamilton becomes the first Secretary of the Treasury. He's the father of the national bank. He's on the $10 bill. Big part of his legacy. Seems like he's got a stepping stone path to the presidency. Of course, he makes some personal and professional errors in judgment or mistakes, and he's never president for a lot of reasons.
Who's on the $100 bill?
Who is on that $100 bill? Orlando, Benjamin Franklin.
Why him? Why not this guy? Because
He's created.
I don't know. I'm sure,
He was-
Haven. There's no doubt a history. No doubt a history between every person being selected for the bills. I don't quite have the answers on why everybody's on that.
This guy came up with it.
Yeah. He also got shot by the Vice President of the United States
Who was
in
that?
1806, Aaron Burr. You haven't seen Hamilton, have you? All right, here's Hamilton's legacy. Some of his achievements. He enhanced the value of the dollar, right? We had a floundering currency, and there ain't going up there. That's fine. This is kind of that summary point, y'all. Okay, you're learning. You're taking good notes. Of course, you could always pull out an extra sheet. That's fine as well. Good job taking notes. Thorough is winning the game. Alexander Hamilton's legacy: he enhanced the value of the dollar. He secured the government credit by having these loans where other countries were invested in our success. And bottom line is he helped the country flourish financially. It seems like his ideas were right? I mean, Thomas Jefferson is debating him and saying he disagrees with him. But in the end, it seems like Alexander Hamilton's idea for the national bank does lead to some short-term success. Couple of criticisms or weaknesses of Alexander Hamilton is he was very often accused of being an elitist. He was a rich northerner. He's actually an immigrant. Okay, he was not born in America, but of course, this is a time period where a lot of people weren't born in America, but they still came to the revolutionary cause. Well, he falls in with that elite crowd, that rich crowd. Never really connects to the common man, the farmer. Does not really understand agrarian society, farmers, the frontier. So a lot of people can't connect to him. Made him good in that inner circle of our early republic, the early politics, but definitely didn't help him connect to the wider American population. So pluses and minuses on Alexander Hamilton's legacy. The next thing that we'll talk about, the issue that we had, remember, is the British problem. We fought a war. We have a treaty. Aren't they supposed to leave? Wouldn't you think they're supposed to leave? Guess what? They didn't. They actually stuck around on the frontier. Now, they weren't hanging out in Boston or New York City, any of our big metropolis cities, but British forts on the frontier, this portion of the country, remember we got from the Appalachians to the Mississippi, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, etc. There are British forts all throughout that area. The British weren't leaving, and we didn't have a strong enough of a standing army in order to actually, expel them, kick them out. So what George Washington does, remember, we're talking about George Washington. These are the challenges he faced. He sends a diplomat, John Jay, to England to negotiate a treaty. Here's what Jay is supposed to negotiate. The British are to stop seizing U.S. ships. They are harassing our very weak Navy. They have a more powerful Navy. The war is over, but the harassing of these ships is still happening. They're supposed to vacate forts on the frontier. They're supposed to actually leave the land that they said they would leave. During the war, there's a variety of, crops stolen, slaves stolen, crops damaged. The treaty said the British were supposed to pay for this reparations. They're supposed to pay for all the things they damaged and stole. Well, they haven't yet. We, as a country, could certainly use the money. So this is part of the treaty. A little bit on the lesser side. I didn't put it in red because it's a little bit lesser. There's going to be a treaty on commerce in the West Indies. That's kind of getting into foreign affairs a little bit. John Jay goes to England. He's supposed to negotiate a treaty for all these terms. John Jay returns from England with only the agreement to stop seizing U.S. ships. They agree to vacate the forts, and they agree to that thing about commerce in the West Indies. Basically a failed treaty. They agree to leave the western lands. That's important. That's good. They're going to finally leave the land that is ours. But by and large, John Jay's negotiation trip was not super successful. Washington accepts the treaty, but a lot of people think that he shouldn't have. A lot of people thought he should have taken a stronger hand with England, show him that we are really our own country. We can fight for ourselves. We're not going to accept your weak
I think you just didn't
treaty.
want another war.
And Chrissy has a great thought, right? Let's balance how much of a fight are we willing to get into here. So Washington, in his leadership, decides to accept the treaty. He takes criticism for it, but guess what? All leaders always do. Whether you love, whether you're for or against the president, there's a side that you could love the president and someone else doesn't. So there's always going to be someone chipping at someone who puts themselves in a position of leadership. Yes, ma'am.
What do you mean they were harassing the ships?
Militarily harassing the ships. They'd shoot at them. They would board them, because this is like the time period of pirates boarding ships. They would seize the sailors. A lot of times they would make the American sailors prisoners and actually force them to serve in the British Army, Navy rather, for serving. So I mean, they're that's what I mean by harassing the ships. Maybe harassing is too nice of a word. They're straight up attacking. Is that a better word? They're attacking these American vessels because they have a stronger Navy, because they're the bigger kid on the block. They lost the war. They had to surrender.
Why would they with our ships though?
Because they were stealing our land. Because they were angry.
That's right. They're angry. It's interrupting our protection of our coastline. It's interrupting the trade that we can do on the oceans, on the open ocean. So they're basically being a bully. They lost the war. They're mad about it. They're definitely being sore losers. Good question. I said harassing ships, and if you if you needed an explanation on that, the Haven asked a good question. What is harassing ships? So there's a lot. There's plenty more history to it. There's entire textbooks about Jay's treaty, but this is as simple as I'm going to make it in this classroom. There's a British problem. Jay's treaty seeks to address it. It's kind of a weak treaty in some people's opinions, but Washington ultimately does accept the treaty, and at least we addressed a little bit of the British problem.
Did they stop harassing the
Was the treaty do? So the British agreed to, I guess I should have put it on. The British agreed to vacate the forts. They're gonna leave these western areas, leave these western lands. And they also agreed to this thing about commerce in the West Indies. I'm not highlighting it because it's not super important to our class. And that's what's weak about it. They did not agree to stop harassing our Navy vessels. They did not agree to repay stolen slaves and stolen crops. So in a way, we didn't really get the big asks. And that's why it was seen as a weak treaty. Does that make sense? Explain it a little bit better? All right, moving on to the taxation problem. Challenges in Washington's presidency. Moving on to the taxation issue. Country's short on money. Remember, that's why we wanted the British to repay us for our stolen goods in the first place. We're short on money. Need cash. I mean, isn't all this conflict rooted in money in the first place? Right? Everything we've talked about so far is related to money. Salutary neglect. The withdrawing of salutary neglect was the payback for the French and Indian War. Taxes and the acts were all related to money. Everything's related to money. Well, here again, the country needs money to run. We need tax dollars. The Articles of Confederation were very weak, could not collect taxes. That was one of its major flaws. Daniel Shays' rebellion, known as Shays' Rebellion, proved that the federal government could not enforce taxation, could not collect money. These farmers were more powerful than the government under the Articles. Well, now we have another rebellion. We have an opportunity to prove that the national government is strong enough to enforce its taxes. The tax at this time, so a lot of farmers, I'm talking about agrarian, people all throughout the country, a lot of farmers with their leftover grain and leftover rye would make, what can grain and rye make? Whiskey, yeah. It's good for food, it's good for bread, of course, but their leftover grain and rye would make whiskey. For all the reasons that people like distilled spirits or alcohol, people like whiskey, right? They like to drink whiskey, they like to get drunk, whatever. Like people like whiskey. People always have like whiskey. Well, if people like something, they're going to keep buying it, and if people keep buying it, what can you do to it?
Make a business.
Tax it. Tax it. So here we are. We have a tax on whiskey. Wait a second. What did we fight that whole revolution thing over?
taxes?
Taxes. So people, the common folk, are instantly put off. They're offended by tax. Didn't we just fight a war to get away from taxes? Well, realistically speaking, the government has to have money. There has to be some taxes. Now, there's overtaxing. There's taxation without representation. That's bad. But we got to understand there's some taxes to be paid, right? You can't have a government. You can't have roads. You can't have schools without taxes. So I'm a middle of the road kind of guy on taxes. I understand some taxes, but these people thought taxes on their whiskeys were just a little bit too excessive. Many farmers and frontiersmen got upset about these taxes because they felt they just fought this war against it. 1794. So we are into Washington's second term as president. Okay, he's been dealing with challenges for about 5 years now as president. 1794, there's a revolt in western Pennsylvania. And this small group of rabble-rousers, a small group of rebels, is refusing to pay taxes on whiskey. They're refusing to give the government the money that they're due. And actually, you know what they do whenever the government tax collectors roll around? You're exactly right. Take a playbook out of that old Sons of Liberty, or take a play out of the Sons of Liberty playbook. And this time, not British tax collectors, but American tax collectors are being tarred and feathered. So fellow Americans are tar and feathering the tax collectors, who of course are just set out to do their job and collect the taxes that the government needs. So many tax collectors being attacked, tarred and feathered, not unlike the American Revolution. Well, to set an example of how strong the federal government is, to prove that the federal government can and will enforce its laws and collect its taxes, George Washington himself leads the army into western Pennsylvania to put down this rebellion. It is the first and only time that a sitting president has led troops in battle. Now, we call our president the commander-in-chief, and he does give orders to the military. In the Army, I fall under the president as commander-in-chief. I've served for, Republican and Democrat presidents. The president is the commander-in-chief. George Washington actually led troops in battle. Now, of course, we know he has a military background. He led the Continental Army throughout the whole war. We know all that. But now at this position, in this stage of his life, he's not supposed to be the military man. He's supposed to be the politician. But he says, as the first leader of this country, right, people are watching, I'm going to lead these troops into battle. I'm going to put down this rebellion. And when word got out that George Washington himself was leading the army, about 13,000 soldiers at this point, leading the army into Pennsylvania to put down the Whiskey Rebellion, what do you think the rebels did? Yeah, they largely dispersed. The rebellion was put down. The tarring and feathering of tax collectors, ceased, did not happen anymore. The federal government proved it could enforce its laws and it would collect the taxes that it fairly, levies. Not unfair taxes, but the right amount of taxes. And that just goes back to George Washington's leadership one more time. When the word got out that he himself was leading troops in battle, people were like, okay. Uncle George, we understand. We understand. So pretty important part of his leadership there. The challenge of the taxation was solved through the whiskey. Well, there's whiskey taxes, and then there's the Whiskey Rebellion. So those are challenging, and here it is one more time. You've seen this screen before, but I'll just show it to you again. Challenges George Washington faced was the debt of the country, thus the National Bank was created. The British problem, and there were several things: harassing boats, not leaving the western frontier, not paying back money that they originally agreed to pay back. Well, we have Jay's Treaty. It solves a few problems, but is weak overall. And then all things related to taxation. You have George Washington leading troops into battle in the Whiskey Rebellion.
Who do they have to pay back? Who are they in debt to?
Who are we in debt to?
Yeah.
So the states were in debt. The states had a lot of debt overall. And remember that we agreed, the national government, the federal government agreed to take on that debt. Northern states were in favor of that. Southern states were a little cranky about that because by and large their debts were smaller. So the issue is federal government versus states' rights. And we're going to continue to see that be an issue all the way up through the Civil War. Do states have the right to choose their own laws, choose their own taxes, or are we under a federal government? Big, trade-off between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The party of George Washington and John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson. He's been a little bit more of a common man president. So did I answer your question a little bit? And we're in debt to other foreign countries. We're in debt to France. We're in debt to imported, countries where we get their imports from throughout the Caribbean. So it's expensive to fight a war.
Why?
Expensive to fight a war.
Why?
Because money makes the world go round, and it's all just monopoly money anyway. It's not even real.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, put that in a full box.
For it.
All right, Washington's precedents. I'm going to go real fast here because this is pretty much what we went through yesterday. Precedent is an action that was taken that was followed by future presidents. You're on the front page here. You got a whole chunk of your page that is for precedents. Here are the precedents that George Washington followed. He took on the modest title of Mr. President. He was not a king. They would not put,
I wasn't finished writing down the definition.
I'll go back to it in a second, Chrissy. Go back to it in a second. George Washington takes on the modest title of Mr. President. Don't call me a king. Don't put a crown on my head. We just fought a war against that. I'll go with Mr. President. Works for me. He has a cabinet of close advisors. The activity we've done twice now, yesterday on Google Meets and here today. It is important to have advisors in your life. Nobody knows enough to run the show by themselves. He delivers the State of the Union address, which is his report to Congress. How we doing? In the monarchy, the king did not have to report to anyone. He could do whatever he wanted. Well, George Washington says, we're going to be open. We're going to be honest and transparent. I'm going to deliver the status report. How are we doing in the Union, the State of the Union, once a year. So I said yesterday, I didn't know if President Biden has given one yet. He has not. Our State of the Union this year is scheduled for March 1st. Traditionally, it's in January or February at the latest, but I guess the Biden administration has set the date of March 1st, 2022. So I looked that up last night. So I'll be paying attention to the State of the Union on March 1st. I hope you will as well. And then by far the most important precedent was that he served only 2 terms. There was not a law that said you have to step down after 2 terms. Today there is. The 22nd Amendment is the law that establishes you can only serve for 2 terms. And I think that's pretty easy to remember. 2 terms, 22nd Amendment. But this was a precedent for a very long time until it was broken by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt was actually elected for a 3rd and 4th term.
We were in the middle of war.
We were in the middle of war. People appreciated his leadership. Obviously, the voters were voting for him, but some people did accuse him of acting kingly, right? If you're going to be the president for more than the 2 terms, then are you trying to seize power? So Roosevelt kind of got criticism for that. And it just also goes to show, just because George Washington set the precedent does not mean that people followed the precedent, right? His leadership, he can try to show what he was, what he thought was the best way to lead, but that doesn't mean everybody had to follow him.
What does that say at the
That's
bottom?
not always the law. What? Yeah, under there, it's the future 22nd Amendment. He served only 2 terms. Today, that is a law based on the 22nd Amendment. Here's Washington's cabinet. I showed you he's only got 4 people. How many people are in President Biden's cabinet? 23. Yeah, that's right. So the size of the cabinet has grown significantly. So now you need to recruit some more members for your cabinet if you're going to keep pace with President Biden. Chrissy?
I need to go back to finish
I'll
writing down like the definition.
get you at lunchtime. I'll go to that slide. This is kind of a review for those that were dialed in yesterday, so I'll get you at lunchtime, I promise. And then Washington's farewell address. This is also part of the Washington page. I want you to catch the main point of his farewell address. The main part is he advocated for neutrality. And the language he actually uses is do not get involved in foreign entanglements. Britain and France were kind of on the brink of war at this point. And he said, let's not take a side. We're not for France or for Britain. We're not against France or against Britain. Like neutral. Let's stay neutral. He advocated for neutrality. He believed that a good government was based on religion and morality. He believed in unity. He thought that having a national identity was more important than regional loyalties. So just because you're from the north and you're from the south and you're from the frontier, let's remember what got us into this in the first place was the unity of the fight for independence. So he wanted to remind everybody of that original unity. And then he also warns against political parties. Now, he doesn't call them that because that term is not in existence yet. They're not called a party. They're called a faction. So he warns against factions. He actually says factions are the worst enemy of government. So I think he'd be pretty disappointed with the political party landscape in government today because he thought political parties were the worst enemy of a good government. This is one of those precedents that is pretty immediately ignored. Just because George Washington said it in his farewell speech does not mean that everybody listened to it. And in fact, we do have political parties crop up in the very next election. So people ignored his warning against factions pretty much right away.
How you gonna make that man feel like he just retired?
That's right? He goes off to under the fig tree, and know what the song says, and he sees the infighting happen. Here's something really cool. I learned this just last night because I read all the time, getting ready for my next class. I never stop learning, and I hope you will be like that as well. In a tradition dating back to the years of the Civil War, a member of the United States Senate reads George Washington's farewell address every year to observe George Washington's birthday, which we call President's Day in February. So I've never known this before. I've never seen it before, but I'm going to pay attention to it this year. The United States Senate will read in its entirety, it's not that long of a document, will read George Washington's farewell address on the floor of the Senate. Obviously, these days, that means there's TV cameras and social media and all that kind of stuff. I wish that our country would hear George Washington's farewell address and actually understand what he was saying. Something that's also pretty cool, whoever reads this, it alternates between political parties. So it'd be like a Republican for 1 year, Democrat the next year, Republican, Democrat. So I don't know what George would think about that because he didn't like parties in the first place. But I think that is pretty cool that our Senate reads George Washington's farewell address out loud on the floor of the Senate every year for his birthday. So Sanaa, there's a pretty good birthday present for George Washington. It's in February, and that's why we have President's Day in February. I don't know the exact day.
It's like when we go on the.
But yeah, Abraham Lincoln and George Washington both have February birthdays, so that's where we get our holiday called President's Day. We just commemorate both of them on President's Day. All right, I know I've done a lot of talking. We watched this yesterday. I'm moving on to John Adams' presidency. He got a little bit of a smaller block. I see everyone turning their page. Some of John Adams' stuff is going to fit into your vocab as well, and I'll kind of highlight that to you. But what I would ask you to do on his block is give the high points, and then John Adams' actions. You know, I got a whole nother section for that. So again, good example of just to listen, take some side notes, fill it in as you go.
So
On
this
down the line.
this right now is just listen.
Yeah, Chrissy, I'd write down I'd write down kind of the red stuff a little bit. Write down the red stuff. But yeah, just listen and kind of summarize in your own words. I know I ask a lot of you when I say summarize. in
That
your own words.
guy, this guy.
That's correct. That's correct. The portraits aren't identical.
No.
So John Adams, he was George Washington's vice president. But when George Washington did not run for a third term, like I just said, he stepped down after 2 terms. Kind of opens the door for John Adams to run for president. He's elected the 2nd president of the United States. In the end, he's president for just 1 term, 1797 to 1800, just 1 term. He has a lot of issues in his presidency. Talk about challenges George Washington faced. Well, John Adams, he actually doesn't have very many good things going on. He's really just got a lot of issues going on. The French were plundering American ships, just like the British were harassing American ships. Now our Navy be sucking all over the world, right? The British are harassing our ships. The French are plundering our ships. It's actually called impressment. Haven, you kind of asked earlier. That is when a Navy will imprison the ship that they just captured, and they will send those sailors to their Navy. So you wake up in the American Navy, your ship gets attacked by the French, and you go to bed that night in the French Navy. So I probably wonder if you're ever going to see your family again, probably wonder if you're ever going to be free again. And, oh, yeah, by the way, now you're fighting for a foreign army as well. That's not what you signed up for. So the French plundering American ships, so much for neutrality, right? Let's not get involved in foreign entanglements. Well, the French kind of broke that deal and they broke our diplomatic relations in that regard as well. Why? They were a little ticked off that we didn't pay the favor back, right? They supported us in the revolution.
Oh, yeah, they.
But now that we're a young, fledgling, independent nation, hey, America, we're trying to fight a war against Great Britain. Don't you guys remember fighting the Redcoats? How about you pay us back? So, but George Washington's advice was, hey, that Atlantic Ocean thing, that's a long ways away. We are too small. We are too young. We are not rich enough. We're broke, actually. We should not get involved in foreign entanglements. So I think the French were like, on that doesn't, you can't just trade in these here waters, right? You don't have free passage in these waters if you're not going to be supporting our military activities. This leads to the so-called XYZ affair. This is not one of our mega vocab terms, so I'm just going to kind of briefly explain it. Because of the impressment, because of the plundering of American ships, we send over American diplomats to France to meet with the French. Hey guys, relax, please stop. Basically, the conversation, you got to finesse it. You got to get this right. Okay, so what happens here is that the American diplomats were not received. And the French said, we're not even going to acknowledge that you're here. Actually, a couple days later, the French say, if you want to talk to our official diplomats, pay up a bribe, right? If you want to get an audience with our embassy, you're going to have to pay a bribe. The Americans were like, hey, we are just trying to talk. We're just trying to negotiate here a little bit. We're not paying your bribe. Well, a couple days later, these American diplomats, basically, they get put in a hotel room. They're kind of sitting on ice. They don't know what's going on. A couple days later, 3 Frenchmen come and they speak to them. And these Frenchmen are never named in any official document. In history, to this day, these names are lost to history. So what we call it is the XYZ affair because these Frenchmen were nicknamed X, Y, and Z. It was a completely unsuccessful negotiation. I mean, we don't even know these guys' names. So we did not get the French to back off. They continued to harass our ships, plunder our ships, all that kind of stuff. Leads to the so-called quasi-war. Quasi means unofficial, halfway in, halfway out, quasi. We did not declare war, but it is a quasi-war, the French Navy versus the young and not powerful American Navy, quasi-war. So you can see from this laundry list here, John Adams is not having a really good time as president. He's got far more issues than he has successes. Another issue that he's going to have at home is he is a Federalist, but the Anti-Federalist Party is on the rise. So he's got an at-home fight between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Now, the Anti-Federalists were those who demanded the Bill of Rights. They did not want to pass the Constitution as it was written because they feared that it would not protect individual liberties, which is where we get the Bill of Rights from. The party is not actually called Anti-Federalist. The party starts to be called the Democratic Republicans. And you might be like, well, are they Democrats or Republicans? They don't mirror either of our current parties today. They're not Democrats or Republicans. They are their own time period. They're a party in their own period of history called the Democratic Republicans. So what we have is Federalists and Democratic Republicans. And what you have is this once unified Revolutionary War generation, this crowd that was willing to fight for independence together. North, South, frontier, man, woman, free, slave, black, white, whatever. Right? Everyone was unified to fight the war. But now we have great disagreements. And it's almost right on cue. Right? We had the honeymoon period with George Washington. He's our founding father of our nation. Well, the second run at president, John Adams, he's starting to have a lot of problems. A way that he, and these are his two big actions, and as part of your vocab, you got a little chunk for it. There's two acts called the Alien and Sedition Acts. They're actually two separate actions, but they're so connected, they always get said together. Just like Lexington and Concord, you're always going to have the Alien and the Sedition Acts. The Alien Act says that the president can deport immigrants for any reason, if he deems them dangerous. Think about a lot of people come to America in the early days are immigrants. They may have heard about independence. They may have heard about good opportunities in the New World. So you have immigrants coming to America. Immigrants are largely of the not elite crowd, the not rich crowd. That means they favored the farmers, the frontiersmen, the agrarian lifestyle. And that is the party that kind of was opposed to John Adams. They flocked more to the Democratic Republicans. So that means that most immigrants opposed John Adams. This action, the Alien Act, said that John Adams could deem them dangerous and lock them up, lock them away, and then theoretically they could not cause him any more troubles. So what this really was something that was used on political opponents. If they're talking and I disagree with them, I'm gonna put them in jail. How American does that sound? Right? Didn't we just fight for that whole package to not happen? John Adams starts acting like that. This was used largely against political opponents that spoke out against the president. And the reason it's called alien is just like you might think aliens from outer space. Alien just means a foreigner. So they are aliens to our country. We still use that term. We talk about immigrants and illegal aliens. That's why it's called alien, okay? Not three eyes and green beakers and such like that. The Sedition Act makes it a crime to speak out against the federal government. Wait a second. Don't we have an amendment that guarantees the freedom of speech? Isn't that a hallmark of the First Amendment? So not.
Why didn't John Adams have just Washington on his cabinet?
George Washington retired. Don't you remember the song?
I
One
know,
last time.
right.
We'll teach him how to say goodbye.
Because it seems like after he left,
Yeah.
Yeah, but where does this man go?
it just went downhill.
It did. That's right. And George Washington probably, was a little upset to watch it go downhill.
Where was he at?
We're at home,
Sitting under a fig
Mount
tree.
Vernon. That's right. Sitting under a fig tree, just like the song says. Sedition Act. Let me get through it. It's pretty important. Makes it a crime to speak out against federal government. False statements. That's a pretty broad definition. So this was used on newspapers. This was used for personal letters. This was used for just speaking out. Like if you made a false statement against the government, bada bing, bada boom, you can go to jail. There are examples, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but there are examples of John Adams' political opponents being thrown into jail, and guess what? Getting reelected from jail. So even though they spoke out against the president, they were thrown into jail, they were still able to continue running for office or run for reelection, and they got elected from jail. So very controversial actions, because doesn't this go against the government that we just established? Doesn't this go against that First Amendment, the freedom of speech? So seen by Republicans as big measures being taken against the freedom of speech. You might not be surprised to know Thomas Jefferson was opposed to these actions. A couple of states, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of Kentucky and Virginia, but a couple of states refused to enforce these actions because they deemed them unconstitutional. Hey, chill out, hang out, click, all that. Still my turn. Oh, there you go. They deemed these actions unconstitutional, and overall, this leads Thomas Jefferson to run for president in the year 1800. John Adams, he doesn't get a free ride into a second term. A lot of times if the president did a good job, you assume he's going to get a second term. Well, Thomas Jefferson says, oh, Johnny boy, you have done a poor job at president, and because of that, I am going to run for president in the year 1800. Now think about how far we've come. Remember this portrait. Who do we have here? In the middle of the picture, who do we have? John Adams, the second president. Standing up, we have old red-haired Thomas Jefferson. These men drafted the Declaration of Independence together. They were compadres, they were partners, they were friends fighting for liberty. But now we have them in opposition to each other. This is a book, but it highlights the tumultuous election of 1800. Okay, the election of 1800 is very earth-changing in our country because for the first time, we have parties going up against each other. John Adams, he kind of walked into the presidency because he was GW's vice president, but now Thomas Jefferson is really going to give him a run for his money. Sometimes it's called the Revolution of 1800. Now, we fought a Revolutionary War, but this is kind of a revolution in government, the first time that we really have a battle for the presidency. In the end, John Adams is defeated by Thomas Jefferson, and here's what's mega about it. This is the first time that a sitting president was defeated in office, but he willingly and peacefully gave up power to a man of the opposing party. You might call this a precedent. See, more than just George Washington can establish precedents. John Adams very calmly and peacefully just left the White House. On the morning of the inauguration, he did not attend Thomas Jefferson's inauguration. Okay, he was bitter enough that he didn't want to sit through the festivities and see his old friend become the president. He just went home, right? He just peacefully got in a carriage and went home. But he established the precedent, super important, that you can peacefully give up power. We don't have to fight a war over it. We don't have to say we're not leaving the White House. We peacefully give up power. This is a quote that is very often attributed to George Washington. I've done some research on this, and actually, as a historian, I think that it's kind of questionable whether this is word for word what George Washington said, but I'm going to go with it because it's a beautiful sentiment. George Washington said, what is most important of this grand experiment in the United States? Not the election of the first president, but the election of the second president. The peaceful transition of power is what will separate this country from every other country in the world. Now, his second president, there was no issues with transferring power. It's really the third president where we see this at play because they were political opposites. They were political opponents. And it really is a miracle, okay? So I'd say it's a miracle of human nature that especially for the norm at the time, where the president was regal and could use the military at his disposal, but John Adams just walked away peacefully, and he established that precedent for every other president into the future. A little bit more about these two men. Let me just kind of tidy it up. Once friends, right? Partners in liberty. They wrote the Declaration of Independence together. Then they became bitter rivals. Thomas Jefferson goes on to serve for 8 years. Okay, he serves from 1801 to 1809. We'll talk about him later this week. So he serves a full 2 terms, steps down just like Washington did after 2 terms. After this time period, he and John Adams, they mend their friendship. Okay, they reach out to each other. They write letters. They meet again. They let the old wounds go away. They heal, and they are friends for the rest of their lives. And later in their life, this is a cool little factoid. I'm going to wrap it up here. Later in their life, they start a competition with each other to see who would live the longest, right? So think about it. They'd say, "Aha, I bet I'm going to live longer than you." Now think about not having cell phones, social media, text messaging, all that kind of stuff. On July 4th, 1826, both men die on the exact same day. But so like I said, no text messages, no social media. They were in different townships. Thomas Jefferson dies first, right? He passes away in his sleep. It's not bloody or tragic, anything like that. Thomas Jefferson dies first. 5 hours later, on his deathbed, John Adams says Thomas Jefferson still survives, meaning Thomas Jefferson wins the bet. But in fact, Thomas Jefferson had died 5 hours earlier.
Jack said they hired a hitman on
In the end, they both die on the same day. Kind of a cute little conclusion to the whole story there. And that is the presidencies of Washington and Adams. What are your questions? Just go back No hitman, no funny business. It's just kind of a nice story where they both died on the same day.
That is insane.
Right, me either.
Where do we put this?
Hey, you know you did.